Have you ever uttered words aloud, only to feel, the very instant they left your lips, as though you'd relinquished something intrinsically yours? A nascent ambition you hadn't yet cultivated, a hidden dread you lacked the fortitude to articulate, a path you'd only dared to contemplate in the quietude of your thoughts. The curious part is, no one inflicted harm upon you, yet you found yourself diminished, as if a fragment of your essence had escaped your grasp merely by speaking prematurely. Carl Jung considered this one of the most insidious yet perilous errors in human existence, disclosing nascent internal states before they've reached a state of readiness. Not because the world is inherently hostile, but because your subconscious mind is not yet resilient enough to withstand the scrutiny of external perceptions or expectations. Certain concepts, when prematurely voiced, undergo metamorphosis, becoming warped or stripped of their intrinsic potency.
Many of us have forfeited valuable aspects of ourselves due to a single, unconsidered utterance. This discourse isn't intended to advocate for a life of isolation, secrecy, or pervasive distrust. Instead, it serves as a reminder of a profound truth articulated by Jung. The inner landscape requires the protective sanctuary of silence at opportune moments. There exist four, and precisely four, domains that an individual who has achieved inner maturity ought to keep guarded. Not for concealment, but to safeguard their inherent strength. If you are prepared, we shall commence by examining precisely these areas that should remain unspoken. The first point: the rationale behind silence as a safeguard for one's inner world. Carl Jung once illuminated a subtle verity. The majority of our psychological afflictions stem not from the actions of others, but from what we ourselves have prematurely divulged. Not everyone grasps that each spoken word carries a quantum of psychic energy, and each time you articulate something that is only beginning to take form within you, you permit the external world to infiltrate a space that should have remained exclusively yours. Occasionally, a single unguarded reaction from another person is sufficient to destabilize an internal construct you have yet to fully solidify. What is peculiar is that this detriment doesn't manifest instantaneously. It infiltrates gradually, much like water seeping through a stone fissure, until one day you realize the original impetus has vanished entirely, simply because it was touched too soon. From a Jungian viewpoint, silence is not an absence of discourse or a passive stance. Silence represents a withdrawal of projection, a deliberate act of repossessing psychic energy that has too readily flowed outward. Jung posited that human beings continuously project the contents of their unconscious onto their surroundings, onto individuals, relationships, their future, and even aspects of themselves they do not yet comprehend. However, by cultivating the ability to remain silent, you cease this outward projection. You draw the energy back, consolidate it, and retain it internally, akin to a re-established current. It is precisely during this phase that the inner realm gains the opportunity to restructure itself. As Jung aptly observed, within each of us resides an unknown other. And when you grant this unknown facet sufficient space, it will orchestrate everything in a manner that the intellect can scarcely impede. When you are no longer swayed by the reactions, glances, or unconscious expectations of others, your mind begins to function according to its authentic cadence, a rhythm that is more measured, profound, and precise. The unvarnished reality is this: all the most delicate processes within a human being, growth, healing, awakening, transpire in silence. Not because the external environment is inherently detrimental, but because every internal shift necessitates an atmosphere uninvaded by discordant energies. I once knew a confidant named Lena who habitually shared every emotion she experienced. Upon commencing meditation, she informed all her acquaintances. When contemplating a career change, she confided in the entire office. While recuperating from a romantic entanglement,
She articulated every step and every contemplation to solicit counsel. Ironically, the more she expounded, the more disoriented she became. The more she elaborated, the less assured she felt. Ultimately, she recognized her inability to differentiate her own inner voice from the echoes of others.
One day she voiced a sentiment I shall never forget. Perhaps the sole action required is not to share more, but to maintain silence long enough to truly hear myself. Intriguingly, as she began to implement this, what had previously been chaotic coalesced into clarity, as if her inner world simply required the space to restore each element to its proper placement. This is the psychological mechanism Jung described. When you speak excessively, you cede the authority to interpret yourself to the external world. By remaining silent, you reclaim that power. Silence does not diminish you. It renders you more whole. It assists you in realizing that numerous matters you believed necessitated external advice actually only required tranquility to attain lucidity. In practical terms, this phenomenon is observable in exceptionally successful individuals. Their reticence is not invariably born of secrecy, but from their understanding of the efficacy of retaining energy internally until it ripens. Anything germinating within you, an idea, a novel conviction, a new trajectory, a process of recovery, demands nourishment through silence. Growth that is hurried is inherently fragile, whereas growth that occurs in quietude is robust. A metaphor Jung particularly favored is that of the artisan potter. He suggested that nascent thoughts and transformations resemble a vessel being shaped. If one touches it excessively, it becomes deformed. If others interact with it, it shatters. It achieves completeness only when left undisturbed. Silence embodies this undisturbed state, a haven where the internal unfolding remains unhindered. You may have experienced the disheartening sensation of sharing something you deeply valued, only to have a single, thoughtless remark extinguish your enthusiasm, your conviction, or even your self-belief. This occurs not out of malice, but because the other party is incapable of grasping the internal processes at play. Each individual operates from their unique frame of reference. What is developing within you belongs to yours. When two frames of reference collide prematurely, emotions become distorted and perceptions are misconstrued. You perceive yourself as being wounded, but in reality, you are simply being dislodged from your core. Consequently, silence is not about concealment. It is about preservation. It is not about disengaging from the world, but about ensuring that what is inherently yours matures at its own pace. Silence is a manifestation of self-respect, a practice of self-care, a means of honoring the nascent development within you. And once you comprehend this mechanism, you will understand why certain matters are best left unspoken, not because they are secrets, but because premature articulation signifies entrusting your internal authority to another. Second, refrain from divulging your aspirations and objectives. Upon understanding why silence acts as a protective bulwark for the inner realm, you will discern an even more subtle truth. Certain endeavors are not compromised by external forces, but by the very act of prematurely vocalizing them. Among these are your plans and goals. On a profound Jungian level, this extends beyond mere ostentation. It pertains to libido, or life energy, and its dispersion through a single, careless statement. Not everyone appreciates that plans, in their nascent stages, resemble delicate streams of energy seeking a channel. The instant too many eyes focus upon them, that flow either diverts or, worse, evaporates. According to Carl Jung, libido is not solely synonymous with motivation or desire. It constitutes the fundamental operational force behind the entire process of individuation, the gradual becoming of one's authentic self. However, libido flourishes only when retained internally, when it is afforded space to move inward, rather than being drawn outward by social validation. Jung remarked, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. What Jung did not explicitly articulate, but which is palpable to anyone who grasps his philosophy, is this: no desire endures long when brought forth for premature exchange. Desire flourishes in silence, nurtured by focused attention and the privacy of one's inner life. Recall the last instance you shared a significant plan with someone. As you spoke, you may have felt a semblance of accomplishment. This is a psychological illusion, which Jung termed the release of energy through speech. It creates the impression of progress when, in actuality, it merely diminishes your impetus to act. Should others offer praise, you experience elation. If they express doubt, you become disheartened. Yet both reactions deplete the very libido that should have fueled initial action. For the unconscious mind, each utterance represents an expenditure of energy rather than its accumulation. A viewer of this channel named Aaron once recounted his perpetual creativity, yet his inability to complete projects. Whenever a new idea surfaced, he would immediately share it with close acquaintances, anticipating feedback. However, the more he spoke, the more he became energized by their responses, while, in reality, he accomplished nothing. Once the initial excitement waned, his motivation evaporated as well. I once inquired, why not endeavor to execute it first and then discuss it? He chuckled, somewhat sheepishly, admitting, every time I articulate it, I feel as though I've already accomplished half of it. And that precisely captured the essence of the issue. He had expended all his libido on discourse rather than tangible action. What required internal cultivation was instead consumed by immediate gratification. Viewed through a Jungian lens, your plan is akin to a seed lacking a protective husk. It is tender, moist, and delicate, necessitating darkness for root formation before it can reach upward. Excessive sunlight, the scrutiny of others, does not nurture it. It desiccates it. Harsh criticism can shatter it. Premature praise can cause it to swell and subsequently wither. A seed requires no audience. It requires soil. And your plan requires no external encouragement. It demands libido. What causes many to abandon their goals is not inherent difficulty, but the dispersal of their energy. Each time you speak, you are not merely uttering words. You are transferring a measure of your directional agency to others. They may worry on your behalf, project their own anxieties onto you, or harbor doubts about your capabilities. Even if their intention is not to dissuade you, your unconscious mind still registers these influences as resistance. Your ego begins to falter, to compare, to question itself, and to defend. Before long, you become uncertain whether that aspiration genuinely belongs to you, or if it was merely something you vocalized once. The most perilous aspect here is the distortion of motivation. What should originate from your authentic self, the yearning for growth, transformation, and advancement, is supplanted by the compulsion to prove, explain, or appease others. You act not out of intrinsic drive, but to preserve appearances. And when acting under such compulsion, exhaustion arrives swiftly. Conversely, when you maintain silence, a remarkable transformation occurs. Libido is directed inward. Discipline begins to form, not from sheer willpower, but from the force of correctly channeled energy. You do not require external validation, nor the recognition of others, nor applause. Silent progress engenders a fundamentally different kind of confidence, the assurance of someone upholding a personal covenant. This form of self-assurance is remarkably resilient because it is not contingent upon external appraisal. At a certain juncture, when your inner energy has attained sufficient potency, you will naturally share your endeavors without fear of external influence. Not for ostentation, but because you have progressed sufficiently to remain steadfast. This is the threshold of individuation, the process Jung described, wherein an individual begins to operate from their authentic self rather than from societal conditioning. Consequently,
Among the 4 categories of information Jung advised never to reveal, he placed plans and goals at the forefront. Not because the world is inherently malicious or others intend sabotage, but because what you are nurturing requires containment to flourish.
You will intuitively perceive that safeguarding your plans is not an act of defense, but a gesture of respect for the journey you are undertaking. Third, refrain from discussing your fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. Having examined why plans necessitate silence for their growth, you might ponder, what about matters that are more delicate, more fragile? Our fears, insecurities, and concealed wounds. From Carl Jung's perspective, the answer is invariably more intricate than we might initially surmise. Fear is not merely a fleeting emotion, it is an integral component of the shadow self, and not everyone in your life possesses the capacity to safely hold, comprehend, or support this shadow. Jung observed, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. While this statement appears to address awareness, its implication is far more profound. The shadow can only be healed within an appropriate environment, with individuals possessing sufficient depth, or through the silence you cultivate for yourself. If you entrust your shadow to unsuitable hands, they cannot bear its weight. Instead, they will unwittingly distort it, project onto it, or magnify its burden within your mind. One of the most pervasive misunderstandings of our era is the notion that transparency equates to disclosing everything. However, in Jung's view, understanding the shadow does not mandate its public exposure. A wound does not heal more rapidly simply by being brought into the gaze of numerous observers. On occasion, it becomes further compromised because the other party lacks the wherewithal to manage that vulnerable aspect. What you perceive as catharsis can sometimes be the act of surrendering your most susceptible self to someone lacking the tools for its protection. In Jungian therapy, I encountered a woman named Mira who harbored a persistent insecurity about her inadequacy. Whenever anxiety surfaced, she would confide in a colleague prone to mirroring her distress. When Mira expressed her apprehension about judgment, the other individual readily reflected it back. Indeed, that's true. The supervisors are exceptionally demanding. When Mira confessed to feeling unsettled, the response was, I also believe you're perpetually too on edge. Within mere weeks, fears that had once been nebulous sensations solidified into absolute truths in her mind. Not because they were factually accurate, but because they had been amplified through another individual also operating from an unintegrated shadow. This occurs due to the straightforward mechanism Jung elucidated. When you reveal your fears to someone lacking inner maturity, they cannot contain them. They project their own anxieties onto you, and consequently you bear not only your own shadow, but theirs as well. You do not feel lighter, you feel twice as burdened. In Greek mythology, the tale of Pandora's box offers a potent analogy. She opened the vessel not out of malice, but out of natural human curiosity. What rendered the box perilous was not its contents, but the fact that it was opened when humanity was not yet equipped to manage what lay within. Misfortune spilled forth, simply because it was unleashed at the wrong juncture. This serves as a precise metaphor for the shadow. The shadow itself is not inherently dangerous. Opening it to the wrong individual at the wrong moment is what leads to a loss of control. If others lack sufficient depth, it is they, not you, who will interpret, project, and amplify these vulnerabilities. You forfeit not only internal stability, but also dominion over your own darkness. For Jung, fear is an intrinsic aspect of the soul, something to be engaged with in dialogue, not something to be presented externally. When you speak prematurely, the ego immediately seeks external reassurance, initiating a cycle of dependency. The more insecure you feel, the more validation you crave. The more validation you seek, the greater your internal authority erodes. You believe you are achieving relief, but in reality,
you are conditioning the ego to perceive fear as safe only when sanctioned by others. This impedes the integration of the shadow and pushes it further from your core. Consequently, Jung consistently advocated for observing fear in silence before articulating it. When you remain with it, listen to it, document it, and examine it without evasion, you are undertaking a profoundly significant act. You are integrating the shadow rather than delegating it to the external world. Inner fortitude does not stem from the absence of fear, but from the capacity to coexist with it without external witnesses. This brand of courage is entirely distinct from the indiscriminate sharing so prevalent today. In that scenario, you speak merely to offload emotional burdens. Here, you remain to comprehend the message that fear conveys, and that message is invariably meaningful. Fear never arrives to defeat you. It arrives to illuminate areas where you have not yet matured. Those who fear abandonment may discover they need to cultivate self-reliance. Those who fear failure might recognize an ego still dependent on perfection. And when you confront these truths personally, no one can distort their significance. Upon grasping this, you will realize that certain fears are best kept entirely to yourself, not due to shame or concealment, but because this represents sacred work between you and your shadow. Retaining these is not an act of avoidance, but an engagement for deeper understanding, for increased resilience, and for advancing to the next stage of your journey with a wholeness that cannot be usurped. Fourth, desist from discussing pursuits you have abandoned. There exists a third category of information that you should also refrain from prematurely disclosing. These are the endeavors you no longer wish to pursue. This may sound straightforward, but from a Jungian perspective, it represents one of the most sensitive and delicate phases of the entire psychological process. When you decide not to continue on a particular path, it is not an admission of failure or an act of surrender. Rather, it is the moment when libido, your life energy, begins to withdraw from its former direction to prepare for the formation of a new cycle. If you divulge this prematurely, you not only impede this process, but may also find yourself drawn back to the very place you are endeavoring to depart. Jung once stated, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." However, acceptance is sometimes not an overt declaration to others, but a silent accord between you and your authentic self. When you publicly announce your decision to abandon a certain pursuit, you inadvertently open the door for the external world to intercede and redefine that choice. Others cannot perceive your internal journey. They only recognize the prior version of you with which they are familiar. And because human beings tend to feel secure when others remain within the roles they have assigned them, they will urge you to revert, maintain your current position, or subtly instill doubt in your internal compass. I recall the narrative of a gentleman named Daniel, who dedicated 8 years to a career as a software engineer. He excelled in his profession, commanded a substantial income, and appeared to be progressing in a socially approved direction. However, on a profound internal level, he felt his energy gradually waning. He no longer experienced vitality in his work, functioning merely on momentum. One evening, Daniel attempted to confide in a close friend his desire to transition into content creation. The immediate response was, "Are you out of your mind? Your job is secure. Why would you leave?" A single statement, seemingly offered with concern, plunged Daniel into confusion. He compelled himself to persist for another year, determined to prove to everyone that he was not unstable. The outcome was burnout, discouragement, and ultimately, a complete cessation of progress. His greatest regret was not the lost time, but the sensation of being disconnected from his deepest inner voice, simply because he had spoken too soon. This occurs because when libido is receding from an established trajectory, it is exceptionally vulnerable. A solitary objection can suffice to rechannel psychic energy back into an old role,
even though you intuitively recognize that the journey has concluded. Articulating your decision does not foster clarity. Navigating the labyrinth of external pressures, other individuals' expectations, their ingrained fears, their judgments, and their desire for dominion can be a significant impediment, diverting you from the authentic path your spirit yearns to tread. To illuminate this, consider a vivid analogy. Picture yourself ascending a majestic peak, only to realize your current route no longer aligns with your intended summit. The natural inclination is to alter your course. However, should you announce this intention, those observing from their distinct vantage points might assert that your present trajectory still appears viable.
They remain oblivious to the imminent peril you perceive. They cannot discern the precarious boulder poised to tumble ahead, nor can they attune to the quiet whispers of your inner guidance. Succumbing to their counsel, even partially, will induce hesitation and stagnation precisely where you no longer belong. Neuroscience corroborates this phenomenon. As the brain prepares to shed an outdated conviction or aspiration, it enters a period of profound recalibration, during which the prefrontal cortex requires tranquility to forge new neural pathways. Any feedback received during this sensitive phase triggers the amygdala, the brain's fear center, compelling a retreat to the familiar choice, which feels inherently more secure. A single query, such as, "Are you truly certain?" suffices to nudge the brain back towards the very path you are endeavoring to abandon. In moments of disengagement from a former pursuit, a period of quietude is not an act of concealment. It is a vital safeguard for your personal metamorphosis. Psychic energy, or libido, necessitates a contained environment to successfully disengage and reorient itself. Premature articulation dissipates this energy before it has reconfigured its circuits, prematurely diverting it outwards to contend with societal feedback. Furthermore, not everyone is poised to witness your evolution. When you depart from an established role, others experience a loss of predictability. Their responses, therefore, offer no insight into your personal journey, but rather mirror their own underlying anxieties. Carl Jung consistently underscored that the most profound internal transformations occur in stillness. Certain elements must be relinquished without fanfare. Chapters conclude without the need for dramatic punctuation.
That which you no longer wish to pursue is not a subject for open deliberation, but a sacred dialogue between yourself and your innermost being. By maintaining silence, you enable change to unfold organically, unimpeded by external voices that hold no relevance to your pilgrimage. Crucially, not every departure warrants an explanation. Often, silence serves as a gesture of respect for the preceding iteration that has fulfilled its purpose, and simultaneously, as a gift to the nascent self preparing to emerge. Withholding your intentions regarding what you are leaving behind is not a deficiency of valor. It signifies an understanding that transformation is an intrinsic right, a private, hallowed ceremony, impervious to external intrusion. A fifth tenet advises against discoursing on your accomplishments, financial gains, or successes. It is precisely from the delicate nature of this process that another, even more significant form of silence reveals itself. Silence surrounding achievements, monetary gains, and all that you have brought to fruition. While the preceding section addressed what you are disengaging from, this segment pertains to the converse, that which you have attained, constructed, and realized, yet about which it is prudent not to speak hastily. This may strike you as peculiar, as our common inclination is to share joy, seek recognition for success, and publicize outcomes as validation. However, from a Jungian perspective, success does not reside within the persona, the social facade we present to the world, but within the self, the most profound, tranquil, and authentic core of our being. And anything belonging to the self requires safeguarding. Jung once articulated, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Success, whether material, professional, or spiritual, is an integral facet of this journey of self-realization. Precisely because of its profound importance, it cannot be entrusted to the caprice of others, nor subjected to comparisons, judgments, or expectations beyond your control. When you articulate your successes, you do more than merely convey information. You open a conduit for others to interpret you through their own subjective lenses. These lenses are invariably tinted by comparison, latent envy, or the projections of their own unacknowledged aspirations. I recall a friend who dedicated herself relentlessly to building her career from humble beginnings. Upon acquiring her first home, she eagerly shared the news with a circle of acquaintances.
Their response was not one of congratulation, but rather veiled remarks tinged with jest. "So, you're wealthy now," one might say. "Someone must have assisted you. Let's see if you can sustain it." These comments, though not intentionally malicious, instilled a subtle unease within her. Her triumph suddenly felt burdened. She began to experience pressure to continually prove herself, to achieve further milestones in response to these unspoken expectations. A moment that should have been steeped in pure elation became clouded by an energy she had not invited. Success proclaimed too soon is easily dislodged from its internal context and transplanted into a social arena where your arduous efforts, the journey you have traversed, are unseen, and only the superficial is acknowledged through instinctual reactions. It is here that the persona becomes vulnerable. While the persona is designed to facilitate societal interaction, when intertwined with success, it becomes exceedingly delicate.
Each commendation inspires a desire to uphold that image. Each envious glance prompts wavering, and every external expectation tugs you away from your intrinsic cadence. Success unveiled prematurely is akin to a nascent flame carried into the wind. Before it can gather strength, it is buffeted by gusts of comparison and envy. Yet when you remain silent, the flame burns within a contained, warm, and secure sanctuary until it possesses the fortitude to withstand any external force. This is why individuals who exhibit profound inner maturity tend to be discreet about their accomplishments. They do not conceal them, but neither do they ostentatiously display them. They grasp that anything connected to deep personal development necessitates privacy to preserve its inherent potency. When you expound excessively on success, you inadvertently transform it into an object for others' reactions. These reactions, whether positive or negative, pull you away from your state of focused concentration. Adulation can lead you to perform to maintain an image. Skepticism can foster a compulsion to prove yourself. Subtle envy might induce you to shrink your presence to avoid causing discomfort to others. Within days, the unadulterated joy of accomplishment can devolve into a psychological weight you never desired. Psychological science further indicates that when success is publicized prematurely or too frequently, the brain shifts its motivational locus from intrinsic drivers to extrinsic validation, meaning you begin to solicit approval rather than deriving satisfaction from within. This disrupts your subsequent trajectory of growth as you cease to heed the self and instead attune to the marketplace, society, and the opinions of others. The paradox lies in the fact that the more you speak, the more challenging it becomes to sustain your original creative rhythm. There is an inherent beauty in individuals who maintain a quietude regarding their achievements. They allow their results to speak for themselves, eschewing the need to force belief or prove their worth. They simply engage in their endeavors and permit truth to stand independently. Authentic success requires no ostentatious displays. It illuminates itself through its inherent quality. Observe that among the 4 categories of revelations to be avoided, achievements, finances, and success represent the most facile channels for energy leakage. This is not because they are inherently perilous, but rather because they readily activate the persona. Once the persona assumes control, the connection with the self, the wellspring of peace and true direction, is severed. That which is cultivated in silence endures. Success requires no explanation. It merely needs to be lived, and when you permit its growth within a private sanctuary, you will witness its natural, secure,
and authentic unfolding, aligned with your being, not with external expectations. The sixth principle pertains to the cessation of the need for revelation and the comprehension of why certain matters, from nascent plans and inherent fears to relinquished pursuits and ultimate achievements, ought to remain unspoken. Gradually, you will discern a more profound stratum of silence, a state not sustained by deliberate effort, but by the sheer absence of any compulsion to vocalize. Here, silence transcends a protective stratagem. It becomes the natural disposition of those who have drawn nearer to the self, the most profound and integrated core of one's being. When an individual operates from this centered self, the necessity to articulate for understanding or to justify for acceptance dissolves. They revert to the fundamental essence of human existence: presence. Jung posited, "The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality." Upon touching this profound realization, even momentarily, the imperative to demonstrate anything diminishes, not through withdrawal from the world, but by establishing an internal foundation so robust that it obviates the need for validation. All that you once felt compelled to share transforms into a silent internal flux, much like a river that achieves its greatest tranquility at its deepest points. This state is observable in public figures who, having navigated considerable adversity, have learned that speaking less empowers them to live more authentically. A salient illustration is Keanu Reeves, the esteemed Hollywood actor known for his roles in The Matrix and John Wick. What distinguishes him is not merely his success, but his remarkable resilience in the face of profound personal losses, from the passing of loved ones to prolonged periods of solitude, all born without ostentation or a plea for sympathy. In numerous interviews, observers are struck by his reticence regarding his personal life. Yet, this silence is not defensive. It emanates from someone who no longer requires words to affirm his existence. He embodies presence rather than explanation, and this presence resonates more powerfully than any articulate discourse could convey. A compelling metaphor for this stage exists in the blacksmith's art. When the forge fire is small, it crackles boisterously. However, when the furnace reaches its zenith of intensity, it becomes silent. This silence does not denote an absence of power. Rather, it signifies the culmination of stabilized power. An individual living from the self mirrors this phenomenon. The deeper they venture inward, the more tranquil they become, and the less inclined they are to speak. Nevertheless, their presence emanates with greater force than any uttered words. In contrast to the earlier phase of the journey, where silence served as a protective measure, this stage represents silence as a mode of living. You no longer harbor apprehension of being misunderstood. As the need for accurate comprehension has dissipated, you are no longer vulnerable to judgment, as your inherent worth is no longer contingent upon words or identities ascribed by others. When living from the self, you recognize that you, rather than the narrative you articulate, are what truly matters. Intriguingly, upon entering this state, others sense the shift without any explicit communication from you. Your equanimity preempts their inquiries. The steadfastness of your energy renders analysis superfluous, and your silence, far from creating distance, cultivates an alluring gravity. Others are drawn to you precisely because you do not seek their attention. They find solace in your lack of need for their validation. They accord you respect because you honor your inner sanctity. Modern psychology corroborates this from a different angle. As individuals transcend the compulsion for approval or validation, the brain enters a more regulated state, characterized by diminished amygdala activity and enhanced prefrontal cortex engagement, facilitating clearer decision-making and reduced internal conflict. This is the state Jung termed integration, the harmonious convergence of consciousness and the unconscious. At this stage of integration, abstaining from revelation no longer feels like an effort. It becomes instinctual. You do not disclose plans because your mind is singularly focused.
You do not voice fears because you are directly engaged in dialogue with them. You do not speak of what you are relinquishing because you are inwardly pivoting with quietude. You do not broadcast successes because you are experiencing them rather than attempting to validate them. Your silence stems not from a desire to conceal, but from having attained a wholeness that renders words for explanation unnecessary. When an individual lives from the self, they uncover a simple verity. No one requires extensive knowledge of you to love you authentically, nor do you need to articulate much to live your life with truthfulness. Your clarity is not conveyed through discourse, but through the aura you project upon entering a room. The self radiates through your gaze, your stillness, your very presence, not through the anecdotes you share about yourself. And this marks the culmination of the entire journey. Ultimately, silence is not an action you perform, it is a state you embody. It is not a learned skill, but a manifestation of psychological maturity. It represents not a limitation, but profound liberation. When the need to reveal ceases, you step into the form of existence Jung regarded as the ultimate aspiration of human life, living as a complete being, unswayed by external expectations or reactions. This is a tranquil, yet immensely potent state, where what holds paramount importance is not what you utter, but the person you have become. Traversing this journey, you will apprehend a fundamental truth. Strength has never resided in your pronouncements, but in your capacity to attune to yourself amidst a world perpetually demanding your voice. Silence, as Jung perceived it, is not merely the absence of sound, but a state of maturity wherein you are sufficiently grounded to remain unperturbed by the expectations or reactions of others. By withholding these 4 categories of personal information, you not only safeguard your energetic reserves, but also afford yourself the opportunity to evolve in accordance with the soul's natural cadence. And if silence bestows any gift, it is the capacity to draw you closer to your authentic self, devoid of haste, ostentation, or subservience to external scrutiny. It is a form of presence that allows others to perceive your depth without necessitating any explanation.